Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak in the debate today and follow so many important contributions from members across the House. It is disappointing that in one way there was very little new that we hadn't heard pre-announced, and I think it is frustrating that Parliament seems to be a sideshow when it comes to the government's making of important decisions. But let me move on to the budget content, because the test for this budget is whether it's making life easier or harder for businesses and families across the UK, and whether it is taking the steps necessary to tackle the increase in cost of living that we all know families in our constituencies are facing. The Chancellor's choices today are shaping how well children will be able to learn, who goes to bed hungry, how our businesses who have been at the front line will be not just able to survive, but be equipped to be prepared for the future. But it is a shame then that the Chancellor seems to have chosen a tax cut for bankers that's bigger than the extra funding that he is providing for children to catch up. And even that now, as a total, is a third of that was the recommended from the government's own czar. And that wasn't a random figure of 15 billion picked out from a hat. It was based on research, and it was based on evidence, and it was based on understanding what our children across our country need to get through and catch up because of what they face and how they were held back during the pandemic. And they need to continue to be front of mind for this House. Now, this winter, the country is facing a cost of living crisis of historic proportions. Fuel shortages, rising energy prices, the government's supply chain crisis and price inflation are hitting families across the UK. A recent survey by 38 Degrees in Feltham and Heston found that 90% of people respondents were concerned that their current supply of critical food and goods. 64% of respondents had witnessed insufficient stock in their supermarket. The price of fruit and vegetables are also up, and a half have seen a rise in their energy bills. And within the last few weeks, the ONS has reported that 8 million Britons have been unable to buy essential food items, while grocery prices are reported to be 1.7% higher than last year. Now, these changes, they cannot be denied. These changes have been compounded by the government's cruel decision, that it was cruel, to cut universal credit for 6 million families this winter, taking £20 a week from the pockets of families at a time when prices are rising. In Feltham and Heston, 18,000 households would have been and are worse off as a result of this cut. 18 million cut from our local economy. Now, where was that £20 of universal credit going? It wasn't into offshore tax havens. It was being spent by families. It was being spent on their families, in businesses, in our communities, in our high streets, and returning what appears to be £2 billion in the changes of tapering to universal credit. That is welcome. It's an important step. It won't go far enough, and it will support some, but not all. And there will still be millions of families who, in just trying to get through, will end up going into debt with all the consequent problems that brings. The Chancellor will know this. Food banks know it. The CAB knows it. Everyone who looks at the income of families and what the impact of that universal credit cut is having will know it. But I am glad, at least, the government has taken the advice of the Low Pay Commission to increase the minimum wage. I welcome this, but it does need to go further, and to a minimum of £10. And good employers like Morrison's have already seen a rise of a minimum of £10 for all their employees. Many families are still going to struggle, and that's before taking into account the likely rise in gas and electricity prices next year. There are no measures today to assist householders with rising domestic gas and electricity bills. For businesses, meanwhile, many are approaching what should be their most profitable period of the year, and they are in grave danger of insolvency. Faced with huge debts from the pandemic, soaring energy bills, rising prices, empty shelves, growing shortages, analysis based on the ONS Business Site Survey suggests that over 300,000 businesses employing over 800,000 people employing over 800,000 people are at risk of closure in the next 3 months. Yet the government's response has been to hit businesses with a new jobs tax, weakening its industrial strategy as well, and taking little short of piecemeal steps to resolve a supply chain crisis that has been made worse because of inaction and a lack of forward planning. A crisis that has hit us and British businesses and families harder than the impact in other countries. And this year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, almost 50 shops closed a day in our high streets in the first 6 months of this year. Without further targeted action, the face of our high streets and communities will be changing beyond recognition. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, today's changes to business rates are welcome and a step in the right direction. Reform, the Chancellor knows, have been, in part, I believe, a response to the stand that we have taken on this side of the House. The current system of business rates in England is not fit for purpose. It does punish investment, entrepreneurship, and it does hit the high street. Some of the incremental changes today in adopting calls from the BRC, the CBI and others for change are those steps we need to incentivise rather than disincentivise investment. But this is today without a proper plan for sustained reform and for rebuilding our high streets and our economy. UK Hospitality has previously said that the biggest cost danger in sight for the hospitality sector was the reintroduction of business rates from 2022. So today's moves are welcome. They are the reasons indeed, these issues are the reasons indeed why Labour called on the government to freeze the business rates multiplier and to extend the threshold for small business rates relief. And it can be paid for as well by increasing the digital sales tax, levelling that playing field between online and bricks and mortar businesses. But it is an area where the government seems to be rather inexplicably dragging its feet, because why is it that the government on page 144 of the Red Book today says that they will continue to explore arguments for and against a UK-wide OST and publish a consultation shortly? I mean, it does seem to be that it's going on a long time. This is not a new issue, but there is an inequity between online and bricks and mortar businesses, and it is impacting the prosperity of those who are at the front line in our communities, who have served our communities, who have served our country through the pandemic, and who are being penalised for being in our communities rather than simply selling goods and services online. So reducing the cost burdens that so many of our businesses face is essential if our businesses are to survive and to grow that necessary employment for the future. But let me just talk about supporting entrepreneurship also, because if this is a government that is genuinely supporting entrepreneurship, I would have liked to see more about that in the budget today. And it would be helpful for the government to be clear if they are still targeting the new enterprise allowance for cuts. Latest statistics show that since its launch in 2011, 268,000 startups have been made by 249,000 individuals. And those businesses have reportedly ranged from plastering, gardening and removals to website design, filmmaking, architecture, businesses that are at the heart of our communities. Sole traders then go on to employ others. It's a scheme that's been supported by the Prince's Trust and others that do such amazing and important work in supporting enterprise and entrepreneurial skills for young people. This is the kind of culture and opportunity we should be looking to enhance. It should be integral and not an add-on. And it's something that in the work we've been doing in Hounslow, I've consistently been surprised, positively and pleasantly surprised by how many young people want to have the skills and opportunities to start their own businesses. How many people who may lose their jobs want to have the support to do something different and to achieve a dream or grow a passion. And yet we seem to make it harder and not easier. Indeed, I grew up in a small business in our community in Hounslow. I have been self-employed. I have an MBA. I've worked in the private sector and the public sectors. I know what innovation and entrepreneurship is. I know what it takes. I know the sacrifices that those who are self-employed and who start up and bear the risk, I know what they do. I know what it takes. And I've also co-chaired in the last year the development of the London West Innovation District, looking to use innovation and create opportunities for research and investment to see our local aviation hub become a worldwide Silicon Valley for aviation, working with all parts of our national and international aviation supply chains to take advantage of opportunities of technology and drive Jet Zero outcomes, working with West London Business, with our research institutions, Brunel University, Imperial College and others, because we recognise that a place-based response to innovation is also what drives sustainable growth. But as part of that is also bringing in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs into that overall growth programme and having an integrated strategy that helps deliver that. So I do believe, and I do want to see the UK be the best place to start and grow a business. And we should be improving and upgrading measures like the new enterprise allowance, as opposed to pulling the rug out from underneath the feet of new community-based entrepreneurs, not just those in the city, but those who are in the heart of our communities, who deserve those opportunities at grassroots level. Now, with a week to go until COP26, the government has failed to also match its climate change rhetoric with action. This has been seen in the Climate Change Committee predictions that the government is on course to miss future carbon budgets. And a recent British Chamber of Commerce survey found that just 11% of SMEs are aware of how to measure their carbon footprint. So how much of the increased R&D investment, which is so critical to supporting innovative businesses at the cutting edge of the new economy, is going to support small businesses too on their transition to net zero? And how is that going to be enabled? How are these announcements going to be delivered and translate into outcomes on the ground, with the difference being made in the recovery of local communities like Hounslow, which were hit very hard by the COVID slowdown, with us being an aviation community, and with those tremendous green growth ambitions? And I cannot see in this budget either the step change in vocational and technical skills that we need, and a less bureaucratic apprenticeship system that has meant and seen, and I'm sure honourable members across this House will have seen this in their own constituencies, millions of unspent apprenticeship levy in North West London, as an example, go unspent. And it is a scandal that this has been carrying on for years, and the government has been told about this. But we need a structural reform to the apprenticeship levy to make it easier to have these opportunities, to have the skills being grown for the future. Because we need businesses to be able to find the skilled workers they need, and we need our local communities to have access to those opportunities so that they are equipped for the jobs of the future. So I too want an optimistic budget, and we all want an optimistic view for our country. But why is there not a budget today that is making a clear, unequivocal commitment with clear messages about our direction, such as Labour's call for investing 28 billion every year until 2030 to tackle the climate crisis so we can protect the planet and secure the jobs in the UK in the future? And this is because businesses want to be certain about where that vision and direction is. A clear view of where they should invest, and to know that that investment they make today will they get a return on it in 5 years' time. It won't be that there's a sudden change of strategy again. And if honourable members across this House and the Chancellor has been talking to businesses, he will have heard that same message that I have. And I just want to mention a very few three other areas of concern before I close. On mortgage prisoners, as co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on mortgage prisoners, it's disappointing there's nothing in this budget to help the 250,000 mortgage prisoners trapped paying high interest rates. The government sold many of them off to mortgage loan sharks, which are charging them hundreds of £1,000s extra a year. This is more than 7 months after the Chancellor promised Martin Lewis that the government was looking for workable solutions. Markets are now expecting rises in interest rates, which will have a devastating impact on the finances of mortgage prisoners. So the government needs to make sure that all mortgage prisoners can access reasonable fixed rates so they get a fair deal and are protected against rising interest rates rises. Now, on building safety and cladding, just a brief mention. The challenges that leaseholders are facing in blocks below 18 metres. I'm not the only MP that's hearing this from my constituents, with the anxiety this is causing families week after week, day after day, with the uncertainty of how those safety measures and remediations are going to be funded. There needed to be more on this in the budget, and the government needs to tackle this urgently. And children and youth facilities, I must say I take issue with the Right Honourable Member, who's not in her place now, for South Northamptonshire on her portrait of Sure Start centres. Her experience was not the same as mine. Now, Sure Start centres, they did exactly what she described. They were family hubs. They gave advice. They supported early education. They supported language and literacy for those that were 1 or 2 years old. They supported new parents. They brought families together. And I pay tribute to Novine Phillips and others who ran, for example, the Bedfont Sure Start Centre that was forced to close as funding ran out. These were cuts that have affected over 500 Sure Start centres across the country, with children who have then paid the price. And youth services, cuts, just on my last...
Lady, we were suggesting 8 minutes. It's now 16. Yes, so please.
Mr Deputy Speaker. And on youth services, no shame in running, project turnover, other than Hounslow youth services as well, cut, those who are now doing excellent job trying to support young people today. So in conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, this budget should have had a longer term and better plan for the short term cost pressures facing businesses and families. We need a more resilient economy and public services. And I'll be honest, I expected more today. We needed more today, and I hope in the interests of our country, the Chancellor will take heed of the comments from members across the House this week. Thank you.